This is erma-v, my emotive, real-time multimodal agent, Virtual, or in other words, my new AI VTuber. That's right, J.A. Ison's dead. You didn't think she was actually going to stay with that name, right? Over the last year and a half, I have been learning to build my own AI VTuber, and oh boy, it's been a journey. In case you're new around here, hey there, Limit here, the naive and inexperienced developer who thought they can recreate Neurosama overnight after taking a single AI course in university. I thought, how hard could it be?
I can make my first ChatGPT rapper, yeah!
Apparently really hard. I've been documenting my progress since August 2024, and while I did technically create an AI VTuber in a few months, a few streams on Twitch, twitch.tv/@mylimit, revealed so many flaws.
It's been 350 fucking hours.
Debug bugs, more like debug bugs.
And she's driving me insane.
And yeah, I kind of expected that, and really what I've done by that point could have been summarized by any number of the making AI VTuber videos out there. But the whole purpose of this channel has been to go beyond the tutorial and show what in-depth development is actually like. That means doing the research, solving problems, and making a lot of mistakes. And while I've taken action to fix a number of them, there's still one that I'm afraid to admit. Open sourcing J.A. Ison. Let me clarify that I like open source and I contribute when I'm not being limit can't code. And I don't regret sharing my code for others to use for their own AI companions either. But what I do regret is tying J.A. Ison's code to the code in Project J.A. Ison/Vita/whatever it's called now. I know, the name's a mess. I built the original prototype to gain a better understanding of what I was building with the intention of throwing it out later to build the more polished AI VTuber. But I fell for sunk cost fallacy and stuck with this implementation, and it was so restrictive. Besides the fact I managed to keep Irma a secret even from my mods for a full year, I just couldn't make the changes I wanted to J.A. Ison's code. Since J.A. Ison's code was the open source code, any bespoke implementation would eventually find its way into the public application in order to avoid divergence. That meant I couldn't use certain tech because it introduced too much setup complexity. I couldn't change an interface, otherwise I would need to change a bajillion alternative implementations, let alone breaking compatibility. And I had to put myself in this very uncomfortable position where the needs of my personal AI VTuber and the needs of a public application were fighting for not just attention, but actually what gets implemented. Because reality is, I can't have my cake and eat it too, so long as they stay as one. Something needed to change, and badly. And that's when I decided I wanted to recreate my AI VTuber from scratch. Prior to my first uploads, I had this kind of plan for what Irma would look like, architecture-wise at least. The prototype was what we call a monolith, a single massive entity that is responsible for everything. But that's not how I like to develop things. I have this kind of OCD where everything needs to be in these small organized units. I like the idea of many small entities specialized at one task, and together they all work as one in order to do what the monolith does. We call these microservices, and whether you love them or hate them, or are just here for the vibes, microservices exist for a reason. Yes, they add integration hell, cross-team collaboration, latency, yada yada. But my biggest issue has been debugging smaller units within my code and managing the crapfest that is Python dependencies and the global interpreter lock. So compared to the open source version, I'm moving the AI models out for easier debugging, testing, and even benchmarking. I'm also getting rid of all the logic that enables swapping of implementations at runtime and all the configuration that comes with it, because I don't need 5 different speech solutions and I'm fine with just restarting the servers when I need to test another setup. This way, everything is so much easier to follow. I don't have plans to break this down any further because nothing else really makes sense at this scale. I remember when I first thought I would be deploying infrastructure to something like AWS and connect everything to Kafka for a pub-sub kind of system. Yeah, for me and my one customer. The other thing I've wanted to do is finally nail down my stack. It's obvious I've been using J.A. Ison as the testing ground for not just making an AI VTuber, but also learning Python in general. So there's a lot of questionable choices that I've just built upon and have been wanting to change for a while now. A lot of the model runners I'll talk about when we get there, but one thing that I wanted to highlight was my previous use of Flask. I originally used Flask because I also had a web UI, which got deprecated after a month. And since then, I've just been tanking Flask as my REST API before switching to Quart when I needed WebSockets and async. Lesson be learned, these are far more suited for serving web pages than being dedicated REST servers. Instead, I should have been using something like Fast API. I frickin' love Fast API, and I wish I learned it sooner. Making a server was way easier than it was with Flask. Handling cores doesn't need all of this, and it was built to support async and WebSockets just like that. Not to mention, this is my first go at Pydantic, and man do I miss typed languages. And the auto-generated OpenAPI docs is the cherry on top. I've only been using this thing for 10 minutes, but I could tell you the docs alone is going to be worth it. Now let's actually start that rewrite, starting with this microservice for MelloTTS. I'm going to be making videos on each of the AI stuff I've learned over the last year, so I'm not going to cover them here, otherwise this video will be longer than my Blender video. But all you need to know is that MelloTTS is a local AI model that can be fine-tuned for custom text-to-speech. I chose it since my community glazes a ton, at least at the time that I implemented this. But I also know that the TTS scene has grown a lot in the last few months, with some really expressive models coming out with even support for voice design like Index TTS 2 or even Qwen 3 TTS. In about 2 hours, I had my first microservice. That includes the time spent picking up Fast API and really just copy-pasting my code from Project JAISON. MelloTTS does have this quirk where it mispronounces a lot of words.
Hey Twitch chat.
Again, I don't really want to go into depth here, but at the time I tried modifying the CMU dictionary, which is like a list of word to syllable translations. I'll link a git gist about it down in the description, but it's a little finicky and there's better solutions to this that I'll explore later. For now though, this service is complete. Well, at least with the knowledge I have right now. I know anyone who knows Fast API is crying right now just looking at this. Hush hush child. I know. Off stream, I spent some time organizing the project. I plan on putting all of my microservices into the same repository, so sharing functionality like logging is a little bit easier. Speaking of which, I also try to improve observability into my services by creating per service loggers and helpers for tracing and logging metrics for every API request. But a couple of days later, I would return on stream to make my next microservice, a speech-to-text service. In my original video about speech-to-text, I used a Whisper Python package to perform transcription. Under the hood, this uses a local version of OpenAI's Whisper models, and I configured those to use the turbo variant. It's significantly smaller than its largest model, while retaining decent accuracy. However, I quickly learned while streaming that I did not have enough VRAM to stream while that was running at the same time. To fix this, I used Cobalt CPP and ran a base size model quantized down to 4 bits. Cobalt CPP is an application that lets you run a bunch of different models, mostly for roleplay, and one of those happens to be a Whisper model that can be downloaded from Hugging Face. Because of that, I added support for Cobalt CPP into Project JAISON, but as time went on, I stopped being so much of a fan of people having to go through their UI to set up Whisper, although I could have probably just made the config files for them. Anyways, now I'm directly using Whisper CPP. It itself is like a microservice, purpose-built for running Whisper models, and my plan was just to wrap it with a Fast API server. Besides the hiccup of form data, it was really easy to set up.
Why? Why? What is this?
I got some speech from my Mello service, which was made easy using the docs page, and then tested a Whisper service, also made easy using the docs page.
200! Response.json.
And yeah, it works about as you'd expect. Of course, this still suffers from all the problems I've had previously with these Whisper models, like how it keeps hallucinating Guatemala and thank you. It's pretty obvious these models were trained on YouTube videos, not a wide variety at that. But that can be fixed with training it a little bit more, which I'll probably do once I finish this video. But next up is the heart and soul of an AI VTuber, the LLM. Up until now, I've been using OpenAI models, and I've tried a bunch of solutions to get JAISON to respond well, from dozens of different system prompts to dozens of fine-tunes, and not once did I get a model that I can actually vibe with for more than one stream. and now my latest training runs aren't even passing OpenAI's safety evaluations. There's a lot of reasons not to use API models, which I've mentioned in the past, and I still stand by them, but I'll add some more to that list. Not only are they heavily censored, but models can be swapped out at any moment, changing the behavior drastically. And when the day comes they stop subsidizing inference, it'll probably be cheaper to have a real girlfriend than dating your AI waifu. So I decided to fully jump ship and finally commit to running everything locally. I was going to do it at some point, but I wasn't expecting to do it now. Project Jason already had support for local inference. When I made my original video, I used Unsloth, and I know I had my moment of slandering Unsloth for inference, but I think they've generally become a good option even if their main thing is still training. But in its place, I've already replaced it with Cobalt CPP in Project Jason. For this service though, I'm straight up using Llama CPP. This is the go-to inference engine for most local applications like LM Studio, Cobalt CPP, and even old Llama to an extent. It's similar to Whisper CPP in that you can just run it and configure the server binary. And there's builds for different hardware and operating systems, so it works on basically anything. Since it's so similar to Whisper CPP, I rehashed the speech-to-text service, but I needed to modify the generation endpoint to support text. Normally, for most applications, you would just use chat completion. This means passing a list of message objects like you would to an OpenAI-style chat API. But instead, I'll be using text completion where you pass a single formatted string that contains everything from the system prompts to the chat history. I did this because I plan on making changes to the chat template. More on that later. But I still wanted this service to be reusable for more typical chat applications. Llama CPP also has a ton of configurations. I wasn't really sure what I was looking at, so I just stuck with what was required, what I recognized from OpenAI, and whatever chat told me I would be stupid for not using. With the generation now working, I needed to make sure I wasn't going to get banned. Testing it again, I noticed something was off.
Why the fuck are we capping out on fucking memory? Yo, chill.
With the models I ran, I was using way more VRAM than I was expecting. Double to be precise, almost like I had 2 instances of the service running. At first I thought maybe I had some loose processes that failed to clean up since the last run, but nope, that wasn't it. Looking into it more closely, that's when I started to realize how fast API works. Currently I load my model at the global scope. This means that it runs no matter what I do so long as I'm running this file. But FastAPI uses UVcorn to run the specified script and function. This file gets ran again when loading, effectively loading the model a second time. And yeah, I know there's other ways of actually doing it now, but for the time I just threw the initialization inside the main guard. I spent the next few days making a video about prompting before ultimately scrapping it. When I came back though, I decided I wanted to create some MCP servers. Over the next 4 hours, I copied and cleaned up the code I previously had for my Discord bot, VTube Studio plugin, and Twitch application. I didn't really change the logic much, and to be honest, these implementations were such a jumbled mess implemented so long ago, I couldn't remember how things flowed. So instead, I just built on top of the shit stack I already had, extending them to have MCP capabilities. The tools that I implemented were nothing crazy, just stuff like DMing on Discord or moderating Twitch chat. But it took me way longer than expected to clean things up and implement MCP, especially trying to get the MCP server to run alongside the Twitch and Discord clients. Like, bro, I don't know why it was so difficult, probably just a skill issue to be honest. And don't even get me started on VTube Studio. My original implementation was just such a mess of flimsy dictionaries, so I tried to clean things up using Pydantic since I was absolutely Pydantic pilled at this point. But even then, the model definitions were getting longer than the code itself, and having all of that in the same file as my logic was getting out of hand. The whole endeavor was just way more tedious than just leaving it as is, and keep in mind, I still banned myself from using AI coding tools at this point, so I was toughing it out by hand. By the end of it, I had 3 hideous files, one for each integration. It was a huge waste of time, but what's even worse is that I knew they were incomplete since I didn't even plan out the API they were going to interface with. And I couldn't test them now because, well, they didn't have the API they were going to interface with. So yeah, 0 out of 10, would not recommend. Next up is the prompter. Inside Project Jason, this was responsible for managing the conversation history and turning it into the inputs to our LLMs. When the input was for chat completion, most of the formatting was just for system prompt and populating the various headers and its instructions. However, it's a little bit more complicated for text completion. The explanation that I gave on stream was painfully hard to understand, so I'll try to give a better summary here. Okay, let's talk about prompting. What do we mean by prompting? Whenever we use an API LLM, specifically through chat, you might pass something like this. It's a JSON object with a conversation attribute, and inside of here you have an array of messages, starting with your system prompt, followed by a back and forth between the user and assistant. Right now is just multiple pieces of text broken apart, right? And you might think, okay, we just pass an array of strings to the LLM and that treats it as the conversation, but that's not the case. The LLM doesn't know from this context where a message starts and where a message ends. It doesn't understand who is speaking. It doesn't understand any of that. It hasn't been fine-tuned to understand this structure, but it has been fine-tuned to understand this structure. You can see here that we start off with this special sequence of characters followed by system. And then at the end, after the message, we have this special sequence of characters. What this is doing is almost like HTML, where you have your beginning tag saying, okay, we're beginning a header, and at the very end, we're no longer inside the header. And whatever contents are inside of here are part of the header. The same thing is happening here. We are starting a new conversational block, we are ending the conversational block, and we are using this system word as a label to signify that this is a system prompt. The LLM has been trained to understand this structure. It may look different for different models. This specifically, I believe, is the Share ML chat template, and specifically it uses the system, user, and assistant keywords. There may be other ones for tool calling or for thinking, but we're not going to go into that right now. If you just start putting arbitrary names like limits, it's not going to understand this because it hasn't been trained to understand that this is the name of who is speaking. It only understands system, user, and assistant. And anything outside of that, honestly, it's free game. We can't really predict how it's going to behave without actually trying it. Yeah, I'm going to talk about this more in depth when I actually make the specific video about prompting and fine-tuning and training and all that. But for now, this is all you really need to know in order to understand what I'm getting at when I'm saying I want to make a prompter. I'm trying to make something that converts a message history like this, which I'm manually tracking, and convert it into something like this so that I can pass it to something like Llama CPP or whatever in order to perform text generation, where it is just continuing from whatever I have given it here, as opposed to saying, okay, construct the prompt template for me from here. How my prompt is going to differ is because I want this to be able to handle multiple users. Right now, we just get a generic user. There's no name associated to it. They're all labeled the same way. ChatGPT, OpenAI's models, they only support one user at a time. It's not like they have a name field where you can supply a name and it populates it somewhere. I wanted to modify the chat template in order to supply the name as well as some other tags, because I wanted to also have actions as well as different contexts. So I guess info or narrator. And this was before I really understood how these chat templates work and how tokenization works. I understood that these kind of look like XML tags. And so I wanted to do something like, oh, I'll have the scene prompt here. I'll also have capabilities. And then it would be followed by any sequence of user with the username here, or we might have response, so on and so forth, right? I wanted to have my own kind of thing, but the main thing I wanted was passing the name to the chat template. And I've been through many iterations of this. I'm not going to talk about that here because I'm going to have a whole video about this, but this was kind of my idea. This was before I really understood how tokenization works. Once I learned about that, this was not going to work because the LLM could very easily just like generate multiple of these just because this is normal text. It's not a singular atomic token. I know I could have specified and made my own Ginger template so that Llama CPP could use that in order to construct the conversation from just an array of messages. But I didn't know that at the time. So yeah, nothing complicated, just a few more things to consider. Now I'm going to be making a microservice for this, but I understand that it doesn't really make sense for it to be its own microservice. In production, I'm planning to use this class directly so I don't have the network overhead when I'm actually calling this a bunch of times per response. However, the fast API integration exists purely for debugging in the docs page. What can I say? It's easy when you don't have to learn anything new. Which I wish was the case for this next service, the MCP client. I made a whole video talking about tooling it, and it briefly covers MCP, but this was before I learned a lot of the tips I gave in that video. In fact, this was the very moment I learned all those tips for that video. Implementing this pissed me off for some reason. The only work I had to base off of was the clusterfuck that was the Project JEISON implementation, and working with this felt like I had ADHD bouncing between all the different problems before they were even solved. I ended up gutting support for everything except for MCP tools, and I integrated OpenAI mainly for debugging with a smarter LLM, and I finally gave structured outputs a try. Bear in mind, I haven't looked at any other references for MCP client implementations. And I was still fairly new to these packages, so it took me a lot of whining and complaining just to get these schemas constructed. And looking at it now, it's actually garbage. But hey, we all start somewhere. I've only tested this client in isolation with a very bare bones MCP tool. I still haven't attempted the whole action intention strategy I had in mind, but for that, I was going to need an orchestrator. While the services up until now have been responsible for one thing and one thing only, the orchestrator is responsible for combining all of them and passing around data in a systematic fashion. In Project JEISON, I refer to this as the application layer, and it was ugly. But in my new implementation, it was way leaner, because it was way less complete. Yeah, I implemented the main functions for chatting, and yeah, there were a lot of things that I wasn't going to implement anyways, but this server is meant to do a whole lot more. For one, I still wasn't sure how configuration was going to work, and secondly, I needed a WebSocket server and broadcast messages, which I haven't even planned out the layout of yet. Regardless, this stream went relatively smoothly, and we were able to get a response from start to finish. However, I knew all the features that I needed in order to support the Discord bot and whatnot just weren't there yet. Really, this was just a proof of concept in order to prove all my services played together nicely. And now my next steps were to prepare Irma's model so I can actually test things properly while offline in preparation for a debut, which I had planned for the start of October. It's only halfway through September right now, so I've got plenty of time. Do I need to say anything? Training the LLM took a little bit longer to say the least. I fully expect the video on Irma's LLM to be longer than this one, and I don't even have a mellow model yet. Obviously, I didn't debut Irma in October, and it's been rescheduled to January 5th. Nobody knows about this though, except for my mods, who I've literally just informed. In fact, the reason I'm returning to code now is because I told them I'd give them a demo in a week, just to see how the vibes are like. But it shouldn't be too bad because from what I remember, I was almost done the whole thing. I just had a small list of things to do that I could remember off the top of my head. So, should be pretty easy, right? Wrong! I was missing so much shit from that list. Every single thing needed an update. What the fuck is a fast API load?
Where are my WebSockets? This prompter doesn't even match my new model.
The only thing these integrations are integrating with is my fucking trash bin. I did my best to fix up as much as I could, but with every file I opened, the list of things just kept growing. You know it's bad when this was all I had in my journal. So over the next few days, I trudged through every service, refactoring them to used lifecycles, exposing their input and output data models, changing how configuration is done, and testing the hell out of everything. I just started a job in a new country, so I'm pulling these hours after my day job on a setup equal to an iPad on a dresser. Everything fucking hurts. I'm tired of this shit, but the AI must grow. It's December 9th now. I'm not even halfway through my list, and it just keeps on growing. I played around with Fast API to see how things were set up and imported between my main script and the script UVcorn runs. And from what I could tell, a lot of the setup can be done prior to calling UVcorn, and they'll just persist into the new context. That allowed me to set up a unified service starting script that sets up all of the logging and configuration for each of my microservices. At this point, I was also looking into client audio solutions. I could chat through Discord, but I've been noticing a lot of latency and stuttering recently. More recently though, I've built a local audio setup using Pi Audio and Silvero voice audio detection for both input and output. Even though it works, it lacks a lot of controls, so I started looking into Pygame as well for a UI solution. But I didn't even know if I was going to support speech input to start with because of Whisper's horrible accuracy, which I haven't even attempted to solve yet. In fact, looking at how much more was on my list and how many more questions I had unanswered, I had to take a moment to reevaluate the scope of what I was aiming for. I keep biting off more than I can chew, and I'm too prideful to admit that I'm painfully slow at developing. But this time, there was no lying to myself. There was just no way I could finish everything, from finishing orchestration, to making robust tools, to robust integrations with Discord, Twitch, and VTube Studio, to learning Blender, then preparing the entire debut stream, and more. It sucks knowing I can't live up to my ambitions, but I also see the mounting frustration from the community over the lack of JEISN and the lack of dev streams. It's difficult when I have so much going on, but I just can't say any of it, and it's been this way for over a year with delay after delay after delay. So it's here that I decided I was going to gut a lot of the functionality for Erma, make sure what I had was good enough for the debut, and just debut to end this never-ending cycle. No more delays, no more excuses. Of the things I gutted, she no longer has actions and she no longer has audio input. That eliminates a solid number of the unexplored problems I'm currently facing, but not all. There's not a lot more that I can think of that aren't essential, but I'll cross that bridge if the time comes. By December 11th, I had completed the orchestrator, and it's kind of beautiful. It's very similar to Project JISN making use of an async job queue, but the implementation is way cleaner, and the usage of Fast API with Pydantic WebSockets was so much nicer to work with. With that, I believe the backend side of things is complete. However, the same couldn't be really said for the front end. I still needed the Twitch, Discord, and VTube Studio integration, and the code for these are wholly incomplete, and after my first experience of trying to rework these in September, I thought it'd be easiest to just rewrite them using existing packages. You see, at least for Twitch and VTube Studio, I decided to raw dog the API and authentication, so it was a bulky mess of JSON dictionaries and even random web pages just used for OAuth redirection in the case of Twitch. So they desperately needed a rewrite. Now at this point, the cries of the dev stream were too much for me to ignore, and I decided to stream myself refactoring the Twitch client code. And after a little bit of searching, I landed on this package, Twitch API. I would have gone for Twitch.io, but it didn't support my version of Python, which I've been using for pretty much everything. But I'm glad I started using Twitch API, since it changed the way that I think about packages. In a way, I think the ease of use for these packages just increased my appreciation for design decisions that can take code that looks like this and turn it into this. It's true the less in your face something is, the more fun it is to use. And the day has come now, the day that I demo Erma to my mods. I'm pretty sure I did show her design to my mods about a week ago, but this was the first time anyone besides myself would hear her speak. Not to mention, this is the first time she would hold a longer conversation. So, just before the demo, I stripped away everything in the Discord bot except for reading text and speaking. I also created a terminal application that allowed me to manage the conversation history and request her to speak, since, to reiterate, she doesn't have speech input and therefore doesn't know when to respond. I tested the waters with a few responses, and I was pretty happy with how fast everything was running and how the responses didn't sound like an OpenAI model for once. I was confident the demo would be a success, but there was only one way to find out. Hey, I forgot to record, and oh my god, it was not good. Hey, even more future editor limit here. I somehow also managed to delete the old coin version of Erma. I don't know, I can enjoy this b-roll of puppies or whatever. I mean, code-wise, nothing crashed at least, but my worst fear was realized. My model is Garbaggio. I swear this battle to get an AI personality to match my spec just never ends. On the good side, the identity stuck and she could answer lore-based questions, the tone of speech matched what I wanted, and the generation of responses were insanely fast. But on the bad, oh my god, the bad. Firstly, it's not Erma. It's like someone was told who Erma was and they're just trying to be Erma by spitting facts about themselves. But it gets even worse. My mods were able to tell that I used Qwen 3 as my model. How did they notice? Because after a while, its responses devolved into thinking slop. Behind the scenes, a lot of modern LLMs do this thing called thinking, where they generate a monologue that only they can see in order to use that context to inform their responses they provide to the user. And it's very obvious when the model is thinking, because it's like they're talking to themselves for hundreds if not thousands of tokens. So sometimes Irma will just give a 10-minute response because she's thinking to herself, and I probably just didn't fine-tune her enough and is getting confused seeing this foreign chat template and defaulting to thinking. In any case, it was word vomit. The other consequences of this is that it also leaks its system prompt. Fun! Ideally, I wouldn't have had a system prompt to begin with, but I noticed while testing that it would get the facts slightly wrong unless I give it the system prompt to reaffirm the identity and lore. I don't know what to say besides it was bad. She would spit out the entire system prompt verbatim. Sometimes she would do it twice. Sometimes she would just end her response with, "Here's my response," and never say a response. It's stuff like training LLMs that tutorials downplay and assume that you'll just get right. It's as simple as fine-tuning, right? I scrapped a ton of videos during this time because they were related to training and things constantly kept coming up that derailed my confidence in saying what I said in those videos. But I'm consolidating all of that into a single video that should be coming out after this one. So make sure you're subscribed since, no lie, I spent longer training LLMs than this entire rewrite. Anyways, it was obvious I needed to hit the LLM gym again, this time with a model other than Quinn, and with a strong enough identity that doesn't need a system prompt. I'll work on that after I get the bare minimum finished though, and for that, I need to create a VTube Studio plugin. Now, despite the mess of code that it was, my old plugin worked pretty well. Essentially, it uses a classification model to categorize JSON responses into an emotion, and depending on that emotion, it would play an animation via a hotkey. This strategy has been battle tested over my last year of streaming, and I personally never had any issues with it. So why am I rewriting it? Well, I never had any issues with it after setting everything up, and in order to set it up, I need animations I can play for each and every emotion. And I don't know about you, but not only is controlling a VTuber avatar actually pretty hard, I couldn't stop dying of embarrassment while operating Irma's model. However, I've been thinking, what if I procedurally generated the animations? Not with AI, because we failed miserably with that before, but with just simple algorithms. And to spice it up, we can create custom expressions and toggle to the classified one at response time. And so I decided I would try creating some expressions. I've never created an expression before, but the more that I created, the more techniques I kind of developed. You can use addition to limit the range to one side, you can use multiply to convey energy, and you can even mix multiple expressions together. An added benefit is that you don't even need to make a keybind for every expression, and instead just send the request directly to the API. And to make the expressions transition seamlessly from this previous state, you can add a transition time here. I'm quite happy with the expressions that I've created, but some could be toned down a bit. Regardless though, once I mix in the procedurally generated animations, it should look way more natural and a lot less repetitive than my previous implementation. That is when I create the procedurally generated animations. At the moment, I have no clue how I'm going to approach that. Maybe I could have an expression for each parameter and transition between those opposites? I wasn't sure about it yet. I'll revisit that later though. Right now I need to rewrite my VTube Studio plugin to make use of these expressions, and for that, I couldn't reuse my old code since it was for hotkeys. I searched online for a Python package for VTube Studio, and of the ones that I found, they just weren't good enough. Either some features were missing or it was too painful to develop with. I just wish there was something like Twitch API out there. And it just so happens that at this point, I have finally lifted my personal ban on AI coding tools, and I decided I might as well leverage them in order to create my own package. After all the documentation I would need is right there with solid examples for each, so it should be able to one-shot this simple package. Except it didn't. Every AI I tried kept hallucinating parts of the API, and I just couldn't get it to simply create the data models for each WebSocket message. I reached a point where I just got fed up with it and decided to write out the classes myself. And my god, I did not expect VTube Studio to have this many messages. Everything after that was pretty simple though, and I designed the package to be similar to how Twitch API works, passing the handlers to a list of callbacks per event. After studying VTube Studio's API for so long, I also found my answer for procedural animations. Each parameter picks a random value and steps from the current value to the next. Map the steps to a sine wave and stretch it over a randomized duration, and we have a smooth transition with varying speed. Apply this independently for every parameter where it counts, and you end up with this airhead mindlessly gazing around. Lip sync, blinking, and breathing are all handled by VTube Studio natively, giving us this result. Developing with this new package has been nothing but a breeze, but it did take out a massive chunk of my time. After that, on top of all of the LLM experiments, I found myself on December 26th, with so much left to do. So I had no time to admire this, and I immediately jumped into improving the LLM. Then Blender, 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, New Year comes, New Year goes, I'm working 16 hours a day, sleeping for the other 8, I haven't left my house in days, I haven't seen the sky since Christmas, and now it's January 4th, one day before the debut. I finished training the new LLM, and I finally solved the problem I've been facing for over a year with that. And I finally finished the debut teaser along with the full video for the day of, but I still had so much left to do and I wasn't sure I was going to make it on time for the debut. If I wasn't stressed before, I sure was now. But today is going to be the first time that I deploy Irma onto her framework. This contains the Ryzen AI Max with 64GB of unified memory. I originally bought it with the intention of using it as a training server, but when I got it in October, it was so new that there was nearly zero support for using something like Unsloth on it. And I tried for weeks back then, hopping between 7 different distros, reinstalling 20 different times, and compiling packages from source, but nothing worked. Inference should be a little bit easier in general though, but I still wasn't confident I could get everything to work within a day. The current setup was an absolute mess from my previous attempts from configuring it back in October, so I ended up wiping my entire drive and reinstalling with Ubuntu. Normally, I would use Arch, but there's more support and documentation for Ubuntu on basically everything, and I just didn't have time to waste finding my own solutions. Still though, after setting up SSH and cloning everything down, I still had to deal with my model runners. For both Llama CPP and Whisper CPP, I used it with Vulkan, which is like the CUDA replacement in this case that works for both NVIDIA and AMD hardware. Whisper CPP required me to recompile from source, but that was easy enough. The real problem came from MeloTTS. Unlike the others, MeloTTS relies on Python dependencies, and if you know anything about AI packages in Python, it's a nightmare in terms of compatibility, and it's even worse for Ryzen AI Max. At the time, MeloTTS required PyTorch version 2.5.1, but the architecture for this chip was using GFX 1151, which isn't supported on PyTorch 2.5.1, at least for the ones that were officially distributed at the time. So I tried compiling from source, except PyTorch is massive and I kept running out of memory no matter what build flags I used. I started digging through the forums and I found this one-off discussion in the Rockham thread where some guys are sharing PyTorch and everything else that I needed for the Ryzen AI Max. I had to configure some things at runtime, but I managed to get MeloTTS and all the other models running on my framework. On a side note though, I also managed to get training using Unsloth working about a month after her debut without those sandbox repos. It was a nightmare even with all the builds these guys had for the Ryzen AI Max, since there was a ton of ABI incompatibility, even with matching versions. I had to spend a dozen hours guessing and checking to find combinations that actually allows me to train using Unsloth, but I suspect support for the Ryzen AI Max is much better now that it's been released for some time, so maybe this isn't an issue anymore. But from what I can tell, PyTorch has started making builds for Rockham again, and those newer versions should now support GFX 1151. But at the time I was working on this, it was massively painful, and I cut out about an additional 4 hours trying to figure this out. In any case though, I was so relieved to finally have everything deployed on my framework. I continued making some edits to the code, such as updating the prompter for the chat template, connecting endpoints, and testing the applications end to end, with my front end running on my main PC while the back end runs on my framework. But now, it's the day of Irma's debut, and I'm literally shaking. I've still got a long list of items to complete, and a lot can only be done manually. So I ended up skipping work, skipping all of my meals, and just poured my heart and soul into this final sprint. So many programs I have always wanted to make, and I just vibed them out using AI coding tools. I created automations for OBS for swapping scenes, toggling visuals, and adjusting volume. I created subtitles using text elements within OBS, and I created a music player that plays music on a separate audio channel from the rest of my computer. But this was just the groundwork for putting the debut together, as none of the assets were even in place yet. For that, I spent hours creating the slides directly in OBS, edited together some quick intro and outro scenes, and checked all the contents of the debut to make sure nothing was missing. And with everything in place, I cobbled together the entire debut sequence and prompts for Irma to answer as the debut proceeds. And I just kept testing prompts, delegating tasks to my helpers, cleaning up the TTS, juggling just a million different little things all the way up until 2 minutes before the stream. But now, there's nothing left to do besides to do it.
Online and ready. Welcome Twitch chat. I'm erma-v. You can call me Irma. 4. Apologies, but there is no erma-v detected on the system at this moment. Irma, alright. Irma, now let's head over to our final highlight. This has Irma, the cosmic Compton of Twitch. I am Irma. I'm giving a presentation to a Twitch chat and will follow the slides. Please allow me to explain the next point of my presentation. Warning, Limit has not written these emotes. They are all erma-v original. Yes, the importance of emotes in Twitch chat. Start user, you are erma-v. Remember, you are giving a one-way presentation to Twitch chat.
Okay, so the stream didn't go exactly as planned. Irma broke down after a few prompts, and really the whole stream after the first few slides was just a mess. I guess it wouldn't be a limit stream if something didn't break, but the weight that lifted off my shoulders that night was just something else. I celebrated with my first non-canned meal in 2 weeks. Yes, your eyes don't deceive you, that is just boiled hot dogs. I did some debugging afterwards, and it was just embarrassing how easily these problems could have been avoided. I blocked my server process here, and I didn't fine-tune with enough context. But what's done is done, and I'm so proud to say that erma-v is finally here. I just want to say thank you to all the artists and developers that I've talked to and worked with behind the scenes to make this a reality. And I want to say thank you to the rest of you who continue to support me in the comments and on stream. We've seriously come a long way since a year ago, and I'm confident we'll only continue to grow in the coming years. This has been quite the journey so far, but if you think that after 2-hour-long videos that I've mentioned everything that I've done up until now, guess again. I did say I have a lot that I wanted to talk about, so if you want to continue following this journey or just want to hear more about how I made Irma, get subscribed if you haven't done so already. I'ma get up and out of your way now. Thanks for watching.